Welcome to Eliminating the Noise Strategies for Effective Learning in a Distracted World. I'm Matt Pittman, a principal analyst with the Brandon Hall Group, and it's my privilege to be your host this afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. And I'm excited to have with me Steve Thompson, Chief Learning Officer from 5app. Steve is an award-winning people leader with 28 years of experience in learning, talent, and organizational development. Now as CLO at 5app, he specializes in using learning technologies to align business and people strategies that foster learning cultures that maximize business outcomes. Hello, Steve.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It's great to be here.
I'm excited about this conversation because I think that learning is poised to become even more critical to businesses in 2024 than even we could have imagined it being so. But what's happening is there's so much attention and focus that's being paid that it's become quite challenging as learning professionals and leaders to figure out how to navigate through all of that and find the right strategy at the right time. And we know this because we recently conducted our 2024 HCM Outlook study, and we asked participants, respondents, to indicate the level of investment in learning and development initiatives that were planned in 2024. And that's what you see on this chart. And what you can take from this is that almost everything is increasing in investment, which means companies are paying more attention and they're raising the bar of expectation on what they need their learning and development teams to deliver. Steve, how does that line up with what you're hearing from your colleagues and customers?
Yeah, I mean, there's perfect alignment. I think there's also an air of caution that comes along with that. With a raised investment, obviously comes the expectation, and I think it really does call out that almost need to revisit how we align to the business, how we talk to the business, the language that we use in terms of demonstrating not only our value, but in terms of these component parts that we're going to be investing in. How do we really demonstrate that they are making a return on the investment?
From a more broad perspective, that last slide was very specific to learning and development. And the question is really in terms of time, money, and resources, what level of investment are you expecting? And then on a broader scale, we just sort of said people strategies. Where are you focused on people strategies? And what I want you to take from this slide is everywhere you see a gold star is a learning connection. Now, you can obviously make the argument that learning underlies all of these priorities, but those are very specific to uh, impact points and connecting points for us. So there's even more noise that comes into the conversation. And then one of my favorite data points, because I lived it, in our Voice of the Customer survey that we ran last year, how many LMSs are in your organization? And what we learned is that 38%, more than a third of respondents, have more than one LMS. So it adds to the complexity. So what we want to know from you in the audience is, where does the noise come from in your world and work? And Steve, what are some of the other places that we know that noise is coming from?
It's plentiful. Noise comes from every single direction, because I think it's very easy to look at it through the learning lens, and all those various initiatives, growing technology, the pace of growth in that space. That's all great, but I think there's also that other lens to consider and look through, which is what do our employees, our team members, co-workers experience every single day. From a learning perspective, when we're looking to really drive through, whether it be a program or a piece of learning or content, how do you navigate that? How do you make sure that your piece of learning marketing or your initiative is seen? So
Yeah.
it's
And we've
plentiful.
got great feedback coming through, things like future proofing the skills. Lots of people talking about AI, but not understanding it. Simplifying the learner experience. That's where the culture of the organization and the learning culture specifically begins to be very important. So we asked you as you registered for the webinar to give us your thoughts on that. Does your current learning culture empower people to take charge of their own development, which can help kind of manage through that? And as you might expect, Steve, it's a little bit of a normal curve where most of our folks are doing that to some extent, and about a fourth, a little bit more than a fourth, are very much uh, have protecting a learning culture that empowers people to take charge of their development. Why is that so important, do you think?
What really resonates for me out of these options, if you like, these component parts, is that leadership buy-in. But it's not only the leadership buying into what it is that we're presenting as a learning strategy, but it's how are they role modeling? You know, how are they themselves creating and fostering the environment that teams can go out and they can experiment? That how are leaders demonstrating that they are continuous learners, and how does that permeate down the various functions, divisions, and teams? And I think that experimentation component is so relevant right now. I think someone may have called it out in the chat around a lot of talk and a lot of noise about AI, but limited understanding. You know, that understanding will come through obviously with knowledge, but also being able to experiment and being encouraged to experiment. So one final point just on this, you see many posts I see on LinkedIn, you know, top 3 things you must do to create a learning culture. You know, let's be honest here, there's no magic bullet. And this isn't something that you can turn up on a Monday and then by Friday do these 3 points, you've got your learning culture. You know, this is turning the oil tanker, but it starts with that vision. It starts with where do we need to go and what does it, the purpose that it needs to be doing.
When you think about learning culture in your own organizations, we would like to know which of these elements do you find is the strongest in your organization today? So it looks like pretty evenly split between continuous learning and leadership buy-in, and then right behind that, the adaptability and resilience. And I think that bodes well for organizations from my perspective. Steve, thoughts before we move on to the flip side of that coin?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's encouraging, certainly from the continuous learning component part, because you know it's integral to the learning culture that you're looking to create. Leadership buy-in as well. You know, encouraging. You know, let's not again mince words here. You know, they're not huge percentages, but you know, pulling out those 2 component parts is encouraging.
Absolutely. So now we're going to flip the coin and we want to know which of those elements would you consider to be weakest. And that's a great call out, Cindy, that continuous learning is pushed strongly, but not actually supported with systemic structures. I've definitely seen that in my time as well.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Organization wide collaboration, uh, far and away the weakest link, as well as leadership buy-in. And I love that happened, Steve, because leadership buy-in is at once strong and at once weak, and it all depends on where you are and how your leaders engage, right?
And it is critical. I mean, go back to the previous slide around investment. You know, that investment is typically going to be coming from or signed off at a C-suite level. So really being able to define what your learning strategy proposition is, tying that back to organizational priorities and strategy is critical. So getting the whole leadership buy-in, it works at a number of levels. You know, certainly from a learning leader's perspective, to buy into the proposition, to invest in it, but also then to role model, as I was saying, you know, to be an advocate, because it really does set the tone.
So we asked you a couple of other questions on the registration process. And so one of those was, what data are you tracking to prove learning's business impact? And again, this can become, in my experience, quite a source of noise for a learning leader. And I don't know but about you, Steve, but I look at that and go learning completions, learner satisfaction, and pre and post assessments. I would expect those to be at the top of the list.
Absolutely, and I think that there's a lot of a lot to be said, in terms of evaluating and getting to that point of business impact. But again, I would overlay this maturity piece, and when I come on and share the case study around Greystar, it's really relevant because learning completion, satisfaction, it have been termed and maybe rightly termed as vanity metrics, because the other way to think about it, it's demonstrating engagement, but not necessarily impact. Way of thinking about it, if you go and watch a stand-up comic, you're going to be incredibly engaged with the act, and will laugh. An hour later, try and recall, one of the gags, what one of the jokes. So the engagement, does it necessarily translate to business impact? Not always. Is there a space for tracking and presenting those as metrics? Absolutely.
We also asked about learner experience and how you would rate it, and we've pretty got a pretty good handle on it, at least in this group, mostly effective to somewhat effective on learner experience. And then the last one, to what extent are you leveraging the full capability of your current learning technology? Any thoughts about that
Yeah,
component and how it adds to the noise, real quick?
I think it is a real contributor in terms of the noise. So if we think about noise as things that prevent people accessing the learning or the content that they need, and quite often, and we hear about it. If you look in the land of learning technology providers, a lot of it is about functionality. It can do this, it can do that, it can do everything. It can make a cup of tea or whatever it may be. But is functionality king? I have a question around that, purely from my experience, because the other way to take the comparison, you kind of need your learning technology to do what it says on the tin. Is there a question here, or maybe a challenge, that our learning technology incredibly powerful, but maybe there's too much functionality or lack of education in terms of how to leverage that?
And so, really, the bottom line of all of this is there's a lot going on, and there's a lot expected of us as learning leaders and learning professionals. And so, Steve, you're going to tell us a story about how to cut through all of this noise. So, I'm going to turn it over to you and take it away.
Thanks, Matt. And if everybody's sitting comfortably, I will begin. So I'll dive straight in and answer the first question that may be on everybody's mind as you look at the slide, which is we're talking about Greystar. What is Greystar? Well, my previous life before I joined 5app, I was a senior director of learning for Greystar, who are a global real estate organization. So my remit coming into Greystar was effectively to build a learning function from scratch. All the challenges that we recognize around taking on such an undertaking existed. There was obviously no learning culture, there was no content, there was no platform, there was myself and one other. So the challenge was on recognizing that this is a ground upward build, and we're on a journey. What was really important for me was to really start to think about the vision and the strategy for learning at Greystar. And a component part of that was around brand. What is it that we wanted to be known for? So for me, very simply, it was around quality, and it was around trust. Priority number one was to get some content, and I needed generic content at that point. So I peered around that very large door into the very large arena of vendors, to try and find a content partner. And that partner that we landed with was Hemsey Fraser. And it ticked both the boxes in terms of that quality and the trust. So what I really needed after that is a way to deploy it. You know, how can we deliver this content to our population? So as part of that vision, which kind of started around creating the Graystar version of YouTube, you know, that bite-sized learning when people need it, created this phrase that I'm sure we hear frequently, which is around creating the right content that's available to the right people at point of need. And I needed a platform that could do that. And it needed to be something that could be implemented really simply without having to train people how to use it. And that's where the connection and where the relationship with 5app came. So we leverage their platform. So we launched to the background of a huge pomp and circumstance in April 2019. We launched that across UK and our European locations. And the business school, as we branded it internally, had 900 pieces of content, which was all Hemsley Fraser content. And we pushed that out in the various playlists. And the launch went brilliantly. There was not one single technical issue, and engagement went through the roof. And it stayed there for 3 months. And then it absolutely fell off a cliff. So as much as it sounded like a Disney story, it really wasn't, because after those 3 months, the user engagement disappeared. So this was a real learning point, you know, for me, of which there were many, which is actually creating a learning platform and implementing it is actually the easy bit. Creating stickiness and ongoing engagement and impact is the challenge. So as we travel along the timeline, as we look at it, we've got a light bulb moment here. And the light bulb moment came when I was in conversation with various partners that we were working with, that actually the platform that we had could be so much more in terms of presenting communication, engagement, well-being, DEI. You know, it just took on this different view. So I started looking at it through a different lens. And this was at the time, it was about June, I think 2019. And in the UK, we were swapping out our Prime Minister, and Boris Johnson, you may be familiar with, took office. And if you are familiar with Boris, you'll also be aware that there's a plethora of comedic video clips of Boris. And what we did to mark the occasion of the changing Prime Minister, we took one of these comedic clips and we loaded it into the platform. But what we did, and this was the step change, we then started to link and underpin all the relevant learning. So for that particular example, it was leaders and managing in transition, influencing, assertiveness, you know, how to focus within 100 days of a new role. Any applicable learning we put against that piece of news. And what we saw was a slow uptick in terms of engagement. The other thing that we noticed is that people then started filtering out through the platform and looking at the other various pieces of learning. So the culture that I was looking to drive and create was a self-directed learning culture, and this was just the embryo, if you like, of that starting to emerge. You know, people were now gravitating and self-serving. For us as a learning team, we then really started to pivot in terms of creating our own internal content. So recognizing our starting point was using external content through Hemsley Fraser, but Graystar as an organization, from a knowledge and from a technical perspective, it's quite niche. It's not necessarily the kind of content that you can go out to the marketplace and buy. So there's a real opportunity for us to start creating our own content, and that's exactly what we did. So we started leveraging some AI technology, But more importantly, we started really engaging with our business, with those subject matter experts, with those superstars that you kind of just want to put you know, you want to bottle their knowledge. And we started plugging them in and downloading and then creating the content. But we got so good at it that we were creating content rapidly, that we went from 900 pieces of content in the platform to over 2,000. Okay, so all of this is sounding great, and we're back on the Disney story. However, you know, we've got the next split coming up where we're posting so much content. I started to see a fall off in terms of that engagement. And this is where this whole concept of noise really started to come to the fore with me. And when I was reflecting on that and thinking around what we're talking about here, I thought back to all the component parts that contributed to noise at that point. And I've just jotted them down. I'm just going to read them out because I think they resonate right now. So what I pulled out at that time was we were in a rapidly changing, evolving environment. There was new policies and procedures coming out that had to be communicated, revolving town halls, comms, engagement coming out from the centre, technology updates on the various platforms that we used. Of course, our daily emails, we're pivoting to Teams. So now we've got Teams channels and team chats going on, WhatsApp groups, new initiatives, projects, deadlines, volume of work that only increases, but bizarrely never reduces, never-ending meetings, multiple platforms and applications to navigate around, passwords to remember, changing priorities. And if you're an international company like Greystar, you've got different languages and different cultures. All of that combined, that's a huge amount of noise. And I think that's not just Greystar, that's most organizations. Now, let's just pause for a moment and recognize that we now need to overlay our world on top of that. We now need to overlay learning and development. So we're pushing our great new content that we're right now creating rapidly because we've got AI to support us with that. So we've got loads of content and we want to push that. We've got leadership programs that we want people to assign sign up to. We've got mentoring programs that we want to get traction on, and it goes on and on and on. So the point here, this was the crossroads where our learning academies suddenly came to life, because we needed a way to start navigating that. Because as much as we were creating this great learning brand, this great proposition, and we were getting traction, actually my biggest competitor was people's time. So how do I cut through all of that to make sure that people are getting the right skills and training that they need to be the best that they can be to propel the organization forward? We were working very closely with our operations part of the business, very large part of the business, but a huge advocate for what we were doing. But the challenge is, how do we upskill them in the flow of work? How do we increase that level of competence and capability, i.e. the skills, knowledge, and technical element at pace? And how, for this particular part of the business, how do we leverage the visibility and usability of the standard operating procedures? So there's a number of challenges there that contributed to the creation of this learning architecture. And those were the measures that we used. We launched those learning academies. We additionally created an onboarding academy in the style of an interactive book that had everything to support a new joiner into the organization at their fingertips, from HR policies to our values, our beliefs, our pillars, our senior leaders, videos welcoming people. How does the organization make money, and what do the different functions do? And a lot of this was all video media, because we'd made it so simple for that to be created. Because of the success of the Operations Academy, we then had marketing, we had development, we had investment knocking at the door saying we'd like this academy for our functions. But going back to my earlier point around learning culture, and there's no three bullet points on how to nail it. We've we've got a timeline here and an evolution of how we created that self-directed learning culture and the various steps along the way to achieve that. This slide is, and don't panic, I'm not going to go through all of this. It's literally a summary to recognize the key challenges that were presented at each point, but through those various initiatives, the outcomes that we then realized. So you can see going for literally from zero to hero. But as much as I keep going on about this great story, there were so many key learning points and crossroads and decisions that had to be made. But for me, the key pull out here is really going back to basics, which is understanding who your customer is, understanding who your learner is. How do they learn? How do they want to learn? What do they need to learn? And creating a way that they can get that at speed, at point of need. So the image that we have here, the framework that we have, we've got functional academies along the bottom. And we've got the skills, knowledge, and technical components. So the reason why we focus on this, and we take finance as an example. So if you're an accountant within finance, what your specific development pathway within your academy will give you is all the skills, knowledge, and technical content and training that you need to be the best you that you can be, to be the best accountant that you can be. And that's your development pathway. And it's functionally specific. When we then look above that, where we've got leadership, DEI, well-being, onboarding, this is purely an example. And it's also, limitless in terms of what these academies can be. But these are holistic. So irrespective where you sit in the organization, if you're a leader, you're going to need leadership development. It also enables people to collaborate from other parts of the business. So you've got that breadth and diversity of thought and learning sharing. Same for DI, same for wellbeing, same for onboarding, purely as an example. Going back to the Operations Academy, when we built it and we launched it, it wasn't L&D that launched it. It was the business. They fronted it, they communicated it, and they had the ongoing engagement around it. And what was really interesting is that they took absolute ownership of it from a content perspective, from reinforcing the message, and of course us as the learning function, we just housed that, and we were the catalyst to help drive and support. What was also really interesting when we started working with marketing, with development functions, they wanted it to look different. They wanted a different aesthetic. They wanted different language. The architecture was exactly the same. But again, as part of that learning, building in that flexibility, that customization to be able to personalize was so critically important. So how do we actually approach it? What's the blueprint on how you do this? Well, the Operations Academy was very manual, as the first one that we did, but it was around identifying those subject matter experts, really drilling down to the individual role and the requirements of each individual role. So recognizing we've got a whole diverse range of roles, their skills, knowledge, and technical the pathways were going to look different. It was important that we could differentiate. So we did a matrix activity, and then the most important part for us is that we then mapped the content. And it wasn't just a case of mapping that skills content in the business school. What we did, we looked across the organization for all relevant content in SharePoints, in various, other houses where, those functions have them in their files, really opening up that collaboration to identify all the relevant and appropriate learning, so we could then bring it into one space. This is the output that we had. So if you like, if you want to be a little bit cynical, where we were talking about vanity metrics, on your left-hand side, there's the vanity. But that's why I make the point in terms of relevancy, depending on organization and learning maturity. So we're building a learning function. So demonstrating to my exco that actually people are using it and that they're engaging with it. Actually, that's a really impactful data point to report back, but it's not a standalone. What really started to stand out for us and the business was the shift in terms of the improvement of knowledge retention, the uplift in technical capability, and the demonstrable skills. So this data was collected from a pilot group of 100 people with a pre-assessment 6 months before launch, and then 6 months post. And then you've got your knock on and you feed into the NPS uptick as well. So amazing stats, amazing figures. There is science behind it, and this was the springboard for us as an organization that really answered that question in terms of cutting through that noise, delivering the content to the right people at the right time, but also demonstrating that actually you can really align very closely a learning approach and a learning proposition to the needs of the business. And on this particular scenario, that's where we got to. So where does that bring us now? Well, what we've effectively done is we've productionized effectively six years of learning, six years of evolution and development. So it's not a case of saying, this is the magic pill. It's not. But there is a product here that or is a solution on so many levels, whether that be a platform challenge, content, personalizing the learner experience, driving and increasing that learner engagement, or very simply, how do you sell it into your business? So, what we've done as 5app is we've taken that, we've productized it, overlaid it with the very simple 5app technology, but it's there as a product, for people to leverage. So just, the last piece from me is, thanks for taking the time to jump on and listening to the case study and the journey and where we are now. I'd be really keen, if anybody's got any additional questions or want to continue the conversation, please do reach out on LinkedIn, or drop me an email. If you want to know about more about 5app and the amazing stuff that we're doing in that space, then jump into the website as well. Happy to take questions, but please do reach out and let's continue the conversation. Thank you.
Steve, thanks so much for sharing all of that with us. I think we've had some great conversation going on in the chat. These 5 kind of key points, you'll get this obviously in the handout that comes via email in just a little bit. So thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, team. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone.